Do our MRT and LRTs actually break down more often than you think? Hello and welcome back to another episode of Ciliselasa, where we talk about issues masa with me, your host Iqbal. And today we decided to look into a source of pain that a lot of you might be familiar with, especially if you live in KL. Yeah, what's the worst way to spend your Monday morning before going into work than this? In fact, the only thing that might be worse than this is if you had to do this, but in Singapore. Now, at this point, breakdowns at LRT and MRT stations feel common enough that we started wondering, are things really this bad? Or does it just feel that way because we're always late and sweaty? So, Chili Sauce Riders being Chili Sauce Riders, we decided to channel our inner kiasu and pull every single disruption announcement from Rapid KL's official Twitter from the past 3 years, starting in November 2022 all the way to October of this year. Just as a disclaimer, these were just the disruptions that were announced and probably doesn't include every single delay that happened, but they should give us a rough idea of how things were. And so to get into it, we'll start with how often do our trains actually break down? So after compiling every single disruption and delay announcement we could find from the past 3 years, we found a total number of disruption reports across the MRT Putrajaya, Kajang, KL Monorail, Ampang and Kelana Jaya lines that we want to try and see if you can guess how many there were from these 4 options. Do you guys think it's A? Do you guys think it's C? Might be B, might be D. But if you've locked in your answer, the correct one is actually C, 272 breakdowns and delays over the past 3 years, which equate to just about 7 or 8 disruptions every single month, or once or twice every single week. Now, interestingly, the worst month over the last 3 years was actually the most recent. In October of this year, there were 18 disruption announcements, with 8 of them happening on the Putrajaya line, which was the most out of every line. Things were especially bad in the second half of the month for the line, with 3 consecutive days of problems with the signaling system on the 25th, 26th, and 27th, and 2 incidents happening on the 31st. Apparently, someone had troboed the track switch, caused some delays. Then, about an hour after that was settled, there were problems with the track switch pula, which caused another round of delays. But it's not always this chaotic. There were times when there were barely any disruptions at all, like in August 2023 when there was only 1 signaling problem on the Kelana Jaya line, and in September 2024 when there were no problems reported at all. Like, really, we checked news reports for incidents that month, but the only failure we found was in Singapore. Which brings us to the next question. Which line is the most problematic? Again, go ahead and guess between these 4. Which one do you guys think? Do you guys think it's the Putrajaya line because it's so new, or the Ampang line because it's so old? Well, if you guessed B, Kelana Jaya, then you're right! You probably took a train on this line to work this morning, given it's the line with one of the highest ridership among them all. Originally called Putrajaya LRT when it started back in 1999, the Kelana Jaya line is one of the older lines we tracked outages for, with the other one being the Ampang line or Star LRT, which opened in 1998. So, being one of the oldest and most used lines, it's not that surprising that the Kelana Jaya line leads with 90 incidents, or 33% of the reported issues over the past 3 years. The most common issues on this line were problems with the track or track switch, problems with the signaling system, which coordinates the trains, and problems with the trains and train components. Now, you might think that the second most problematic line would be the Ampang line, since it's even older than the Kelana Jaya line, but Ampang is actually in 3rd place with 45 incidents, or about 17% of the total number of incidents, which is half that of Kelana Jaya. Second place actually goes to the Kajang line with 74 incidents, making up about 27% of the total. Why the Kajang line? We're not entirely sure. The Kajang line is relatively new, having only started in 2016, and in terms of length, it's only just slightly longer than Ampang and Kelana Jaya, but with fewer stations. But if you look at the ridership data for this year, we can see that it's the most used line among the 5. So if we had to guess, it's probably the wear and tear from handling so many people. Think of it as like the difference between a mom with 1 kid versus a mom with like 9 kids. Obviously, the mom with 9 kids will eventually lose her shit and whack one of the kids, or trains in this case, more often than the mom with 1 kid. But speaking of moms with 1 kid, let's take a look at the least problematic line, which would either be the KL Monorail or the Putrajaya line. So the KL Monorail only recorded 30 incidents, or 11% of the total in these 3 years, while Putrajaya had 33 incidents, or 12%. While the KL Monorail is a lot shorter than the other lines, only having 11 stations, and the Putrajaya MRT is a lot newer, having started operations in June 2022, that works out to about 10 incidents a year, which isn't really that bad. Even new moms and cat parents have problems. Which brings us to the next question. What were the reasons behind all of these disruptions? So besides looking at the number of incidents, we also looked at why these incidents happened and how long they took to resolve, as long as the people who handled Rapid KL social media updated us lah. Sometimes it would just say technical issue with no further explanation, while other times it would say there were delays but don't mention that the issue had been resolved later. Then there were times when they would just tweet links to press statements, which kind of grinds our gears because dude, you have one job. Anyway, overall, we identified 7 categories of causes, and the first was issues with the train, which included problems with train components, brakes, air pressure systems, doors, and even reports of trains straight up refusing to move and having to be towed off the track. This was the most common issue, making up 61 incidents, which was about 22% of the overall number. Close behind in number 2 were issues with the track with 22% or 60 of the incidents. This category involved anything messing with the tracks like trees falling on them, track switches adding up, alarms that warn about track obstructions, and even passengers falling on tracks or just deciding to cross them. Well, because technically that does count as an obstruction. Then, in third place were issues with the signaling system, which allows trains and stations to communicate with each other. So if there was a problem there, trains would have to be driven slower and stop for longer at stations, which caused delays. These 51 cases made up about 19% of the incidents. The rest are less common. Fourth and fifth place were issues with the platform doors and power supply, making up 8% of the incidents each. And in sixth place, rarely were delays caused by disasters like fires and lightning, making up less than 3% of incidents. Then finally, in seventh place, at less than 2% of the time, were delays caused by maintenance like upgrading works or trimming branches. And so if you add all of these to 47 cases where the cause was vague or unspecified, which make up 17% of the incidents, we have 272 cases in total. Now, as for how long these disruptions lasted for, we were kind of able to estimate by looking at the difference between the first tweet announcing the issue and the last tweet mentioning that the issue had been resolved. But these are just estimates because the delays, like our suffering, would still go on for a while even after the issue was resolved. So, minus 14 instances where the issue resolved tweet wasn't posted. Most of these issues were resolved within 24 hours. 149 cases, which is more than half, were resolved within an hour, and of these, 39 were resolved within 15 minutes. The rest took somewhere between an hour and a full day, except for 2 super long cases. The first one happened on the Kelana Jaya line from 5th to 14th of November 2022, which took roughly more than a week to resolve. Essentially, there was a problem with the signaling system which kept happening again even after it was repaired. So while the service kept running, it was slow as the trains had to be driven manually at a few stations, which slowed down things for the whole line. The second one was way longer, spanning months from late January to May 2023, and it happened on the Ampang line. There was a structural issue that happened near the LRT Bandaraya station, causing cracks in the viaduct and pier, and naturally trains couldn't pass by the area, so some of the stations had to be shut down until the issue was resolved. The thing was, that impassable area was also where trains needed to pass by to get to the depot, so that meant there was no maintenance for the trains during that entire time. Eventually, service slowed down as more and more trains had to be taken out of service, and there was even a point where only 2 trains were running. More stations eventually closed down until finally they finished the temporary repairs on the area and the stations were opened again on the 12th of May 2023. So yeah, most of the time, disruptions were resolved fairly quickly, but having an issue several times a month isn't that fun. Especially since most of these issues happen at peak hours, with 94 of them, about a third, happening between 5 to 9 a.m. when people are rushing to stare at their phones during work, and another 73 happening from 5 to 9 p.m. when people are rushing to stare at their phones at home. Which finally brings us to, will these issues ever be resolved? To their credit, Rapid KL and Prasarana have been pretty open about how they're doing in terms of reliability. The performance of these lines are publicly available on Rapid KL site, which they measure using something known as mean kilometers between failure, or MKBF for short. Basically, MKBF measures how far the trains travel before running into a relevant failure, meaning any technical problem that causes a train to stop moving for more than 5 minutes. The higher the MKBF, the better, because that means the train can travel further before it runs into issues. Right now, the target MKBF for the Kelana Jaya, Ampang, and Kajang lines are 1 million kilometers, which is the same target Singapore set for its MRT, but only 150,000 kilometers for KL monorail, probably because it's so short. But as of October of this year, only the KL monorail passed its target with an MKBF of 240,000 kilometers, while the other 3 lines are still pretty far behind their targets. Ampang line reached almost 800,000 kilometers, while the Kajang line reached 520,000 kilometers, and the Kelana Jaya line not even reaching half the target at about 400,000 kilometers. Still, according to this trend graph they provided, things look like they're slowly improving. But hold on, what's that yellow line over there? That would be the MKBF for Putrajaya's MRT, which almost reached 2.8 million kilometers far higher than the other lines. This is actually really interesting because if you remember earlier, we mentioned the second half of October of this year had been a rough time for Putrajaya line with a lot of disruptions. That will mean that not all disruptions count as relevant failures because the trains are probably still moving even if they're a bit slow. Now, we're not sure whether this is a fully accurate picture of how good or bad our train network is, but based on the MKBF graph, things are improving. Look, it's a process. There's been a lot of upgrades and maintenance over the years to these lines, and even as we shot this video, the Kelana Jaya line is in the middle of upgrading their outdated signaling system so that it can last another 20 years. And so, while there's still a lot of things we're not sure about, at the very least, we know that Rapid KL is aware of how they're performing, what their problems are, and they're actually trying to do something about it. A public transport system that's slowly improving is arguably better than more cars on the roads causing more traffic. So for the moment, we guess just enjoy the little surprises in life, and don't forget to like and share this video to your boss the next time you're late to work, while keeping it on Ciliselasa for all current issues and more. Tambah pedas.